Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am back for my Week 8 overview, analysis, and at the end, my power rankings for the LCK. I'm very excited to release this video. Again, I posted this on the community tab, but I do apologize for this coming out a day late here on Wednesday instead of Tuesday. Unfortunately, there was a huge internet outage in my area yesterday, and so nobody had internet around me. I was not able to post this video. So here we are on Wednesday being able to upload this. Hope you guys aren't too mad at me. I'm super excited to get into some LCK action, but before that, let me know down in the comment section below, what series were you most looking forward to seeing? You had quite a few choices this week. I think DAMWON Gen.G was certainly on the tip of my tongue, but we started off this week with actually a pretty good one. So let's go ahead and jump right into day one here, and kicking off day one was a fun series here between Liiv, SANDBOX, and DAMWON Kia. Liiv SANDBOX taking a 2-0 series win against DAMWON, who have really in the last few weeks started to take some pretty big steps back in terms of team play. Definitely not what you want to see, and certainly some steps back in terms of drafting. Liiv got to do exactly what they wanted in this series, which is dump resources down into the bottom lane with Prince and Kale. Krako was really able to get a lot of momentum going. He was a really good jungler in this series, and then once Prince was online, the games were over in both respects, whether that be on the Kalista in Game 1 or on the Sivir, especially here in Game 2. But I want to give a huge shout out and huge props to my player of the series here, which is going to be Kale here in the support position. I think Prince is getting a lot of noise here in the LCK, deservedly so, for playing really well and for being one of the more exciting players in the LCK to watch this year. But I want to give a big shout out to Kale, because I don't think he gets nearly the same kind of respect that Prince is getting, even though Kale, I think, is playing at a pretty damn great level. He was awesome in Game 1 here on the Renata, just completely shut down the entire enemy team. Those ultimates are really hard to deal with, and ranged support with Kalista is actually really difficult to play around, because at any moment in time, that ranged support can become an engaged support. It is a very difficult dynamic to actually deal with, and Prince and Kale played it very well. Obviously, Prince was kind of the carry in terms of damage, but I thought Kale was probably the best performing member of the series here. Obviously, the Tahm Kench game in Game 2 went pretty well as well, keeping Prince safe all the time, but also being a relatively strong engaged player, and obviously taking the Tahm Kench that he just destroyed basically in Game 1 and playing it back in a lot better of a way. But Prince was great. He was the damage dealer. Krako was phenomenal this series. He completely and utterly out-jungled Canyon. He jungle-canyoned Canyon. So definitely a good sign there. And then Closer actually looked pretty good here. He was given a lot of resources in the mid-game, which obviously helps, but he's not always particularly been great on the Azir pick, so it's really good to see him come out here, get to play Azir into something like a Galio, and still do well. I do discredit Showmaker a little bit for this matchup, but we'll get into that later. Obviously, Dove was fine. Moving into DAMWON, there are quite a few things that I think this team did poorly. I think their bot lane continues to, quite frankly, be a problem. I will say Bible is in now for Kellen. Kellen has gone a little bit radio silent here. There is a chance that he is done. Like, that he is just straight up done for the season. That he will not be coming back for playoffs, and if they make Worlds, he will not be coming back for Worlds. If that is the case, I think this team's ceiling drastically goes down. Because as up and down as his bot lane has been, I actually think Kellen has been relatively the strong one in this bot lane out of him and Dectum, and they've already been the weak link. If they get even worse, which is what they would be getting here with how Bible played, I'm very concerned with what DAMWON's production will be like for the rest of the split here. But Bible and Dectum got completely run over in this series. It was not even close. Prince and Kale are on a completely different level, quite frankly, than either Dectum or Bible can even remotely touch here. So really wasn't too much of a shocker, but it was really disgusting watching that Tahm Kench and that Alistar die over and over again. He was very close to getting my dud of the series, but unfortunately, that is going to go to Canyon in the jungle, who was just bad. Like, there's really no other way to put it. He was really rough in Game 1 on the Wukong, and in the Game 2 on the Poppy, he was trying to make plays, but unfortunately, none of the plays he tried to make were good, and Krako just had his number and was able to outplay him pretty much in every aspect, even in a counter matchup, which you really hate to see. So Canyon was not playing all that well. He very much deserves my dud of the series. This is something that, with Canyon, I've gone back and forth with. When DAMWON wins, they often win because of Canyon this split, and when they lose, they often lose because of Canyon. So it very much feels like he is the player that decides whether DAMWON, you know, is going to win out or not win out. Obviously, the bot lane's definitely going to have some say, but Canyon has so much influence over this team that is definitely interesting. Showmaker and Nuguri were fine. They weren't really great, and they weren't really awful, at least in terms of, like, a large series scale. I didn't think Showmaker was that good in Game 2, but he was on the Galio, so I didn't really care. And then, outlook-wise, I guess for DAMWON, this is a rough loss, and especially if they're going to be losing Kellen for the season, that is a rough blow. And, man, like, I really do think that overall Canyon and Showmaker are still strong. Nuguri's a good top side. Even if the bot lane struggles, I expect them to still be good, but this loss, like, getting blown out by Liiv SANDBOX here is not a good sign. It's definitely something I would be worried about. They're, I believe, 0-2 against Liiv, and they're also 0-2 against DRX. Both of the teams that they're probably most looking at for playing in the first round, maybe KT Rolster in that respect, but, you know, both of the teams they're looking at, they really have had a tough time actually beating in the regular season, so I'm not super confident that this team is just going to auto-qualify for playoffs, or for Worlds through playoffs this year. It's certainly going to be a battle for them, and they're definitely going to need to get back on track. As for SANDBOX, you know, I'm a little bit higher on them, I think, than I was before this series and before last week. I've been very hard, I'll say, on Liiv SANDBOX. I definitely think that they generally have been performing great. I just get frustrated sometimes when I see a team that has one player winning every player of the game, and clearly it is their team, and yet teams simply don't target him. I wonder what the plan is. Maybe we won't ever have to find out with SANDBOX. That would be the dream, right? Is that we never even have to find out what the backup plan is for SANDBOX because Prince and Kale continue to just not get targeted, but you know, theoretically, a team will eventually say, like, okay, we're just gonna put 4 men down there, and we're gonna force closer to win. And it'll be interesting when that happens. We'll have to see. So, yeah, shout out to Liiv. I do think they look better and better every week, and this was a huge win for them in the grand scheme of things, at least. Moving on to our second series here of day 1 action, and our second series was a fun one, I guess, but for one side, between the Kwangdong Freecs and Gen.G. Gen.G with another absolute stomp, as they have kind of been known to have all year long here. Not the best series from Kwangdong, but it's Gen.G, so what do you really expect? Let's talk about what they did right. When this team's, like, clicking on all cylinders, I've said it multiple times, like, they just can't lose. I've read in, like, quite a few different responses to this series, like, oh, how do you let Ruler have Zeri? Or how do you let Chovy have Azir? Or something like that. And I'm like, oh, okay. So you just don't ban out Poppy, or you don't ban out Silas, or you don't ban out Yuumi, or you don't ban out Singed. You know what I mean? Like, there are 99 champions that this Gen.G team is good at. There are an ocean of talent, and yet, you know, somebody's going to complain every single time something's let through. They got destroyed on Yasuo Sejuani, so I can't sit here and pretend like I'm, you know, like it got completely draft gapped, right? They played Zeri Yuumi into Yasuo Sejuani and lost, so I can't sit here and pretend like it was all a draft problem, right? But overall, I think Gen.G played great here. Peanut was phenomenal. He's going to get my player of the series. He continues to be one of the driving forces of this Gen.G team, and someone that I think is globally very underrated in that talk for best jungler in the world right now. I absolutely think he deserves to be in that conversation, and, you know, I've had a lot of people tell me that Owner should be above Peanut or things like that. That is just something I don't agree with. I think Peanut has been not only on a better team, right, but I think he's been arguably the most impactful member, along with Ruler, this split to Gen.G being the best team in the LCK. So, definitely something, like, I don't know, Peanut has been phenomenal, and I think he's in the MVP conversation. Absolutely, for sure. Chovy was also stellar in this one. He was very close to getting my player of the series here, but it did go to Peanut for me. Chovy was great. Chovy, we've talked about him quite a few times on this channel, can either be the carry or be the secondary player at this point in his career, and I think that is really what has changed Gen.G, you know, and Chovy-led teams from being kind of one-dimensional, kind of similar to what Liiv SANDBOX was, where it's like, pump all the resources into Chovy and just hope he wins. And they've kind of moved on to, like, wow, you actually can be anywhere on the map, and we believe it. They made some really, really smart macro plays in this series. I remember specifically in Game 2 here, KDF basically goes all in on first Rift Herald, And it's like, great, we're just going to give that up and we're going to get full tower bot lane. And it's like, yeah, that's a great trade for Gen.G, because what does Rift Herald usually get you? At best, tower. And if you can get that without Herald, like, for sure, trade Herald for that. It's a great play. You got full map pressure. They were able to get deep wards, just set themselves up really nicely. It's macro plays like that that really give me faith that Gen.G actually is one of the best teams in the world, and that this isn't just going to disapparate at Worlds. Disapparate? What? Disintegrate? What? Evaporate? I think I just combined two words. I don't know what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is that Gen.G is so good that I'm left speechless, and that I'm making up words to describe how good they are. But moving on to KDF. KDF's good. They're not great. They're certainly not great. They got obliterated in this series. This kind of happens to KDF anytime they go up against a good jungler, is they just absolutely abuse the fact that not only is KDF's jungle super weak, but their macro in general is very bad. You know, Fate continues to be rough for this team. LM continues to get gapped by anybody who's even halfway good. And then Keen continues to be, I don't know, this team's biggest anchor the second half of the split. He was really good, in my opinion, for the first 4 weeks, and then the last 4 weeks, he's just been like, oh god, like, what happened to Keen? He's gonna get my dud of the series here. I really hate saying it, but, like, he has just completely become an anchor and a weight for this roster that I would not have predicted at all. Teddy continues to be the only one that has any chance to win this team games, and he was fine. He was fine on Zeri in Game 1, and he actually got a bit of gold on the Sivir in Game 2, but, you know, Gen.G was just so far ahead at every point in time that it really just did not matter. Unfortunately, he was never going to have the chance to win the game because Gen.G was just meh, right? You know, like, they were just there. They were there, and all of them were 5k gold up, so it was like, okay, whatever, I guess we lose, so... even if Teddy didn't play all that bad, everybody else did, and the game was basically unwinnable by 15 minutes, you know, maybe even earlier than that in both cases. So, not a great series overall for KDF, and especially for that top side. But outlook-wise, like, they're in their own tier. Like, I've talked about it all season long, and they continue to be, right? They're better than the bottom 3 teams of, like, Nongshim, Fredit, BRION, and Hanwha Life. But they're not nearly on that same level as the top 6 in, like, KT Rolster, DRX, Liiv SANDBOX. Like, they're just not on that, like, those teams' level. And it's very apparent to see. They're just in their own tier at 7th place, and they probably will be for the rest of the split. Although, if they keep playing like this, there's a chance they even fall down to that bottom, you make it a bottom 4, you know. For Gen.G, they're the best team in the league, maybe the best team in the world. Very, 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 very dominant, not only in 1, 2, or 3 lanes, but in the jungle. You know, they have the best, one of the best supports in the world. Like, they're just terrifying. They're one of the best teams I've ever watched play League, and if they can keep this up, like, macro-wise and talent-wise, I don't know how many teams in the world genuinely have a chance of beating them. I think they have a chance to actually take anybody in a best of 5, so... you know, just hold on, Gen.G. I'm really, really hoping for you guys, and, you know, I love this roster, and hopefully this can lead to Chovy finally hoisting that LCK title. Moving on to Day 2 action here, and we kick off Day 2 with our first 3-game series of the week here, as we saw KT Rolster take on Fredit BRION. And KT does pick up the win in a 2-1 series win here. Bro does continue to fight, as they've done all year long. Even, you know, after their rough start, I should say, where they went like 1-9 or whatever through the first couple of series. 1-10, something like that. Something awful. They've really started to make a habit of taking at least one game off of pretty much everybody they face en route to losing. But KT looked alright here. It was a kind of different KT win. I think KT often has been playing through, obviously, bot lane a lot recently, with Aiming kind of having his little resurgence, Life playing a lot better recently. And I think top lane has kind of been the nice complement to that. Rascal has always been this big power player that wants picks like Akali, and can really take over, obviously, his famous Lee Sin. Things like that I think are really, really strong for him, and he can play really aggressive and be able to take over lane. But in this series, I think it was a little bit different, because I think Vikla was certainly the one getting a lot of the resources, and he was certainly the one opening up a lot of the map for them, especially in not Game 2, but especially in Game 3, I will say. Really, really good game on the Ahri there, as he was able to unlock, I think, what a lot of the rest of this team want to do. And I also want to give a lot of, you know, a lot of props to Cuz, who I think I've been really harsh on over the course of this split, and I definitely, like, he deserves it. Like, spring was not good for Cuz, and then he comes into summer and he's continuing that form, but I'd say over the past like 2 or so weeks, he's probably gotten a little bit better. I think his confidence has gotten a little bit back after KT has started to win games again, and that's definitely been a good sign for him. He had a much better series here than I think he's been having in a while. Even the Skarner game where he looked kind of lost was still okay in the long run, just not perfect, right? I thought his Wukong game in Game 3 was super important for the win there. Him and Vikla have actually teamed up to be a relatively decent mid-jungle duo. I wouldn't certainly not say one of the best or anything like that, but, you know, one that I think can function and exist in the LCK, at least over the past few weeks, and that's been positive. So even if Vikla is my player of the series here for KT Rolster, I want to give, you know, props to Cuz, because I think those two were really the driving force. And it was kind of nice to watch a series where Rascal and Aiming could kind of take a little bit of a break. Not to say that they were completely, you know, irrelevant or anything. Rascal had a really good game in Game 1 here, and so did Aiming, honestly, on the Zeri. They were able to open up a lot, but honestly, that KT Rolster bot lane did get beat relatively hard in Game 2 by the Sivir Leona. And yes, Sivir Leona is a ridiculously strong lane if you can get it going. Obviously, once Sivir gets online and once Sivir starts winning, it's pretty difficult to stop her, but, you know, not the best to be losing to Henna and Delight, who I have as the worst bot lane in the LCK. So, definitely not the ideal situation there, but overall, I think still a relatively fine series. I want to say for Aiming, though, no more Lethality Xayah. Lethality Xayah in Game 3, he tried his best to completely troll. I like the teleport here, but I don't know, just not a fan of the build, not a fan of the pick, just in general. But moving on to Bro and what they were doing, like, they were okay in this series. Again, I think a lot of their problems come from the fact that just isn't that good. Like, he's okay, and he'll win you games, but he'll also lose you a lot of games. And that's kind of what we saw here. Was really, really bad over the course of the series. He's going to get my dud of the series for Fredit BRION. Just completely out-jungled by Cuz. It's, you know, I would say except in the game where they won in Game 2 here, where was better, although he certainly wasn't the reason that they won. I would say pretty much all of that was Henna and Delight down in the bottom lane, who I am going to give props for. I've been calling Henna and Delight like the weak links of LCK bot lanes, like the worst LCK bot lane, and quite frankly, they were pretty decent in this series. They basically single-handedly won Game 2 when they were on a super broken Sivir pick, and they kind of carried that to the bank. So big props to them. Henna actually played pretty well, and I've been consistently calling Henna the worst ADC in Korea. So definitely something to keep in mind there. If Lava doesn't make some weird plays towards the back half of that game, like stealing Xayah ult, going top lane, and then just dying, I think Bro has a much better chance of actually winning that game. They actually set themselves up in a really, like, decent position to be able to pick up the win. Unfortunately, they just weren't able to do it with their positioning. But outlook-wise for that team, I do think that they are interesting, right? I want to just get this out of the way. Somebody in one of my Discord servers messaged me like, "Hey, what do you think of the idea that Fredit BRION's kind of on Evil Genius's level?" And that sentence alone made me throw up. So I feel like I have to talk a little bit here, just because I definitely feel that there is a gap between where I view this team and where the rest of the world views this team. This is not a good League of Legends team, right? Like, even if you don't like Evil Geniuses and you think that LCS is bottom tier, they are not Fredit BRION. Like, they are just simply not on this level. This is a team that really struggles to actively do anything with leads and is consistently throwing it through the most important part of the map. And that is really, really sucky to watch, but that's who they are. Like, they're not a good team, and anybody who thinks they are, I think, is wasting their time. As for KT Rolster, I'm high on this team. I've talked about it. It is really comforting to see that they can win through things that aren't Aiming in life and aren't Rascal. That's definitely a plus, I think, for this KT team. But overall, it wasn't the most dominating victory. Like, they definitely were in a position to lose in that Game 3, but luckily they're playing Fredit BRION, who loves to throw Game 3s, and they kind of got out of it unscathed. Definitely with the resurgence of Liiv SANDBOX this week, and, you know, we'll see what DRX is able to do, but this is definitely a week where I think all of them get even closer than they were maybe even last week. Really, like, telling the difference between the you know, 3 to 6 range DAMWON and that too is nearly impossible. They're all good teams and they all can win. So, you know, KT picks up a win that they absolutely should here, but outlook-wise, it's going to be really difficult for them to really pull apart if they're only winning by the narrowest of margins against a team like Bro. Moving on to our second series here of day 2, and the second series was a little bit of a stomp, a little bit of a block, kind of similar to the second series of day 1, and we're looking at T1 versus Hanwha Life Esports. This is really what a 12-2 team versus a 1-13 team looks like, as T1 obliterates Hanwha Life Esports. Not even remotely close, quite frankly. Kind of disgusting to look at and to watch in general. T1 just had their number in both games. Hanwha Life tries both of their lineups. Not that it really matters. Willer and Cheoni in game 1 played fine. Like, they weren't the hugest of problems, although Willer didn't play particularly well. And then in game 2, they go back to OnFleek and SamD, and they lose significantly harder. And so I don't really know what that means, but it's certainly something to keep in mind. Let's talk about T1, and let's talk about Owner. He got his Lee Sin in game 2. Big props to Owner. He got his Lee Sin in game 2, and we're very proud of him. He did really, 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 really well on that champion. And he very much deserves my player of the series here. He was awesome. Obviously, I'm not the biggest Lee Sin fan in the current meta. I think that he's a little bit of a trap pick, but man, when you're like that good at a champion, I always say this, if you're that good at a champion, it doesn't matter if it's meta or not. Like, you're gonna make it meta. And Owner is that good at Lee Sin. Like, he clearly proved here that he can play Lee Sin at a level that even if the champion falls off after 15 minutes, like, it does not matter. He's in perfect positioning range. He knows the limits of that champion pretty much exactly, so he's able to play it to a really high level, even if other teams, you know, aren't able to do the same. So very, very proud of Owner here. I was kind of crap talking him a little bit earlier here with the Peanut argument, but Owner is still like a top 2 to 3 jungler in the, you know, in the world. Like, I think you could certainly make that argument. I think like Kanavi, Peanut, Owner, like, that is like your best junglers in the world conversation right now, and he definitely deserves to be a part of it. Wasn't the only one who played well. Zeus obliterated everybody in game 1 here on the Akali. Akali top we're seeing a lot more in recent regions. I think teams are getting a lot scared to play it because they know they can play something more defensive in the mid lane. Obviously, we see Faker on the Galio here, and he does a great job. Like, I want to give him big props because he does a great job on the Galio, but Zeus gets that green light to go play the Akali in the top lane, and he obliterates people on it. Looks really good. And then in game 2, he was kind of the reason, if you really think about it, that they won the game 2 at all, because he's, you know, not only did he play a really good game on the Sejuani, but he was standing under tower, and Hanwha Life decides, like, okay, we're going to dive the full health Sejuani, and they give up Baron, basically for no reason, and they lose the game. So, you know what? Like, yeah, shout out Zeus. He was basically the reason that Hanwha Life's brains turned off, and they lost the game. So, definitely something to keep in mind there, and kind of funny overall. Guma and Keria continue to be ridiculously consistent. Overall, everybody on T1's playing well. As for Hanwha Life, like I said, they went through a couple different roster rotations here. Willer switched out with OnFleek, Cheoni switched out with SamD. I have been very pro Willer and Cheoni just playing the rest of the year. They certainly looked better in the series. My dud of the series is going to go to that jungle position. Not only was Willer bad in game 1, but OnFleek was worse in game 2. This really is going to OnFleek for that awful, awful Viego game that he had to play against Owner in game 2, where he just got completely obliterated. And I want to give a fun stat here. Obviously, everybody knows that I track my players of the series and my duds of the series. It's official. OnFleek has now become the leader in all-time duds of the series here at 6 across just one split. He's been the worst player in the series 6 different times now. That leads all regions in the world, and we got to be super happy for him. Definitely not a season to remember for OnFleek, as he has probably been the worst player in the world in terms of the rest of his competition. But Willer wasn't much better on the Viego in game 1. Still got beat up by Owner in terms of map pressure. The Cheoni versus SamD argument, SamD was out mispositioned a lot more, but also Owner was significantly more fed. So take that with a grain of salt. Guma got 2 games of Zeri. Bot lane didn't really matter. Vista didn't play well. Karis had some highlights. Like, he at least was able to do stuff in game 2 here on the Silas. Not that any of it mattered, but, you know, he was at least trying to make plays. Overall, Hanwha Life was never close to a win in either of these games, especially game 2. Outlook-wise for these two teams, Hanwha Life sucks. Like, they might be the worst team in the league. Them, Nongshim, like, they're really throwing it up. I think Bro's, like, pretty clearly at number 8 for me right now. Maybe Nongshim at 8, I don't know. It's not Hanwha Life. They are garbage, and they can't even figure out, you know, they don't have a single player on their roster that I think is, like, not bottom 2 or bottom 3 in their role, with maybe the exception of Dudu in the top lane. Although, even that, I think, is pretty arguable. Just not a good team. They're just not a good team at all, and I don't expect them to get a lot of wins. As for T1, this is a good bounce back after losing to Gen.G last week. I believe that was last week. They set themselves up to kind of continue to move on. Obviously, a decimation of a bad team here isn't going to completely wipe away a lot of the things I'm worried about with T1, but they're still one of the top 2 teams in the region. Still one of the teams that I would consider a world's favorite. So they have a lot going for them. Top side played really well here. Obviously, bot side always plays well when they get Zeri, so just things to keep in mind. T1 continue to keep the ball rolling. Moving on to our third day of LCK action here in Week 8. And we kicked off Day 3 with a pretty decently fun series here between DRX and NS RedForce. Obviously, NS still in perpetual freefall mode, but they are able to pick up a game here, which I'm sure they'll be happy about. DRX not in the best of spots after an 0-2 week last week, but they bounced back relatively well here against NS. Certainly not a perfect series. You don't want to drop a game to NS. That's certainly not where you want to be at in 2022, but here we are. DRX was fine. I want to give huge props to Zika here, who is going to get my player of the series. And I'm going to say this now. Zika, I think, is going to get lumped in with this DRX team as like, oh, DRX underperformed. That must mean Zika underperformed. Zika's been playing his ass off for this DRX team all year long. I think a lot of people have been talking about how Deft has been really good for them, and I think Deft has been really consistent for them in the fact that even when they lose, Deft is often not bad, but when they win, it's often not, like, it's not always because of Deft just, like, taking over games. When pretty much all of their wins, all 19 of this team's wins this year have been Zika, like, or at least in some way, shape, or form, it have been Zika really taking over and having a really good split. I want to give him a lot of props where he deserves it because I think he's probably been the most underrated player in the entire league this year. He's been really fantastic, and I just don't see anybody talking about it, but he was really good in this series. Obviously, his Sylas is absolutely nuts. 13 kills and 16 assists in Game 1. Pretty much just being in every single fight and making a difference in every single fight on that Sylas. And then in Game 2, he absolutely takes over the map. He's doing the most damage in the game, maybe with the exception of Deft, but it's still maintaining his ability to survive and relatively be this team's front line in a team fight. It's actually really incredible stuff. He played really well in this series overall, and this year, this split, he's genuinely been fantastic. I want to give credit to Deft as well, who played a pretty solid series here, and then, honestly, big shout out to Kingen, who I think under the radar has been one of the more consistent top lanes in the entire LCK this year, which is like the opposite of what I would have expected to say. Kingen really has not been an issue at all for this team. He may not be the carrying force here, but he did his job basically perfectly this series. Yes, he was going into Renekton twice, which I think overall is just a super weak matchup to have to play into, but he played it really well, and honestly, his late game, like, frontlining on the Gragas, on the Sejuani, was really important for this DRX team, and he did a really good job. So, I want to give a lot of credit to Kingen, I want to give some credit to Deft, and I want to give a lot of credit to Zika for this win here. As for NS, not the worst series in the world. You've kind of been getting blasted in a lot of the other ones, so you're going to be happy to take a game off of a relatively good team here in DRX, but it's not the best. The positives here, Ghost I thought played really well in Game 2. Ghost and Snowflower were really able to win lane hard. Obviously, Sivir is a ridiculously strong pick in the meta right now, and if you can get ahead on that Sivir, it's going to be really good for you, and Ghost was able to do that in Game 2. Probably one of his better games in recent memory. And the Snowflower I thought was relatively okay in Game 2 here on the Tahm Kench, being able to set up that Sivir, but mostly Ghost on that Sivir. I do want to point out, 2 straight games of Renekton Rise is probably not the call here for NS. I always say, like, if it's comfort, go to comfort, but, like, it's not like it worked. Like, it's not like it was a particularly, like, winning strategy. BDD was fine on the Rise. In fact, if BDD wants to pick Rise, I'm really not that upset by it, but 2 games of Renekton, I think, is probably going a little bit too far with that advice. Kana is going to get my dud of the series for that. He basically did nothing in Game 3. Like, I don't even think he existed in Game 3. I'm not really sure what his purpose was on that champion. Wasn't doing any damage at all, wasn't frontlining. I'm not exactly sure what Renekton does in the meta right now, but shout out, he wasn't particularly good in Game 1 on the Shyvana either. Was kind of getting beaten up a lot by that Sejuani in the top lane, and wasn't even really able to accomplish that frontline duty because he built Demonic too early, so he actually wasn't that tanky. He was a little bit too, he was too hybrid in the sense of they needed full tank Shyvana that game, and they just didn't get it. So, definitely not great from Kana and NS in general. Outlook-wise, like, NS bad. They're a bottom 2, bottom 3 team in the league. They're going to be happy to pick up a game off of DRX. It's not the end of the world or anything for them, but, like, they're way out of playoff contention at this point. And then for DRX, they're going to be happy to pick up this win, definitely. They moved to 8-7, back above 500. This is a team that is kind of ping-ponged back and forth. Obviously, the 2-0 week into the 0-2 week, into the 2-0 week, into the 0-2 week, and then into a win here. Obviously, they can keep the pattern going, and they can get 2-0 here. Hopefully, that means that they're going to start to, pick up some level of consistency. Pioshik was fine here. Beryl was a little bit better. Those are the 2 players that I think have really struggled for DRX so far this year. Hopefully, if those 2 players can find some consistency, we've seen Zika play well. We've seen Deft play well. Kingen's probably having his best split in the LCK. It's a lot to ask at this point with them not being so consistent all year long, but DRX certainly is in a position where, you know, a couple tweaks away from just being a pretty good team that I would expect to maybe have a chance to make a playoff run in just a couple of weeks here. Moving on to our second series here of day 3. And we had what was my most hyped game of the week here. And of course, I am talking about DAMWON KIA taking on Gen.G. Gen.G does walk out with a 2-1 win, although it is a lot closer, I think, than maybe they were hoping it would be. This was a pretty back and forth series, and DAMWON still is able to put up quite a bit of resistance against a Gen.G team that looks relatively impenetrable against most other teams in the league. That gives me the confidence to say that DAMWON at least still has some kind of power here. But let's talk about Gen.G first and foremost. There are two players here that you really, I mean three, but mostly two players here that you have to talk about. Ruler and Peanut, who are just too good. They are simply too good at the game to be ignored. Peanut had a great game 1 here on the Wukong, and was really able to propel his team ahead off of just getting pretty large macro advantages and being able to translate that into pretty much any objective that they want. While game 1 was close at times, Gen.G always felt like they had their finger on the trigger, right? Game 2 was actually a pretty big DAMWON win, as they were able to do a lot in that late game off of that Amumu. I've always talked about it on this channel. Amumu is a very hit or miss pick, I think, in pro. Amumu is either going to get your team a ton of kills, or it's going to get the enemy team a ton of kills. And it really worked out for Bible in that game too. He was really, really phenomenal. Dectum was able to completely destroy here on the Kalista, and even Canyon on the Karthus, a very rare Karthus jungle pick that we saw here. Canyon did a really good job on that pick. And then in game 3, you basically gave Gen.G everything they wanted. Not only does Peanut have the Poppy, not only does Ruler have the Zeri, Doran gets a Gangplank pick. It's not Gnar, but it's still pretty good. And Lens gets his Lulu to help protect everybody. So this was a really, really good draft for Gen.G. And even though DAMWON put up a pretty decent fight in the early game here, mostly off the back of Showmaker's Victor, DAMWON was able to come out with the win. Ruler was doing too much damage. Poppy was too much of a hindrance problem for that. Lucian, for the Gnar jumping in, just generally speaking, making it very difficult for those two champs to play the game. So overall, just a great series here from Gen.G. Ruler is going to get my player of the series here. He was awesome. That Zeri game in game 3 definitely deserves it, but he played really well in game 1 on the Sivir. Even in game 2 in their loss, he was definitely the carry here for Gen.G that kept him in the game on that Lucian with that Nami pick. Ruler always plays Lucian Nami at a completely different level. I hear a lot of people talking about how Lucian Nami is like a trap lane, and I think in the way that it's played by a lot of lanes, it is. If you play it specifically as like, oh, we're gonna have to be really, really safe. You know, we're gonna play so aggro early game, and then once we have a lead, we're just gonna try and fight over and over and over again. That could be a problem. The thing about Lucian, and I think I've talked about this on the channel, but not in the LCK videos, is that late game, it's not that he doesn't do damage, it's that he is really short-ranged. And so it's very easy for a lot of the champions in the meta right now to be able to take advantage of that. Something like an Ahri, or something like a Camille, or an Amumu, as we saw in game 2, can pretty easily take advantage of Lucian's short range. And he has trouble really avoiding death in circumstances like that if he wants to get all his damage out. But if you're a good enough player, if you know when to time your shit, if you know when to go in and when to play safe, you can make Lucian look really good, like Ruler did in game 2 here. But overall, Ruler was great. Peanut was great here. Not only was he my player of the game in game 1 on the Wukong, but he was a huge facilitator in game 2 here on the Poppy. Very much or game 3, I should say, on the Poppy. Honestly, just a really, really good series from him. He continues to prove that, in my opinion, he's one of the best junglers in the world, one of the top 2, in my opinion. But, you know, I won't go there right now. And then, you know, Chovy was fine. Lehens was really good. Doran was fine. Not a great series, you know, obviously game 2 on the Renekton, you hate to see that, but overall, a pretty decent series from Gen.G. They're going to be glad to pick up the win here. DAMWON, they were certainly in a position where they could have beaten Gen.G, and that is probably more than a lot of people would have expected, especially after how the beginning of their week went here, but relatively good series overall. I thought Dectum and Bible actually bounced back really well. They were the carries in game 2 here in their win, and even in game 3, like they weren't awful, like the Lucian Nami matchup. It's just tough if you lose early to really be able to compound that, especially into a Zeri, who's just always going to have the range advantage on Lucian. Really not going to be able to give a lot of opportunities to do something. Lulu keeps him protected pretty much indefinitely, so definitely not a great matchup there. But they were really, really good in game 2, especially Bible on that Amumu. But I also want to give a shout out here to Showmaker on the victor, who was able to keep the game relatively close in Game 3. Nuguri and Canyon definitely took a little bit of a step back. I thought Canyon was really good in Game 2 here on the Karthus, but Nuguri just didn't have that good of a series overall. His Game 1 was awful here on the Siege 1. He was constantly out of position and being taken advantage of for it. And then in Game 3 here, he picks the Gnar away from Doran and just isn't able to capitalize on that pick. So he's going to get my dud of the series here, although it was a little bit of a hard pick because nobody on this team particularly played bad all 3 games. I just thought Nuguri was really the only one that wasn't like a top player in any of them. So that's what I went with. Outlook-wise for DAMWON, it's going to suck they pick up a lot, like an 0-2 week here, but this is a relatively good series for them overall to go into the best team in the LCK and actively be able to hold your own, be able to take a game off of them and make Game 3 like really, really close up until the end here. I think that's going to be a positive for DAMWON, even though the 0-2 week is a little bit of a sour spot. As for Gen.G, they're the best team in the LCK. They are able to take care of DAMWON, who always does step up to play the better competition stronger. And they're sitting at 15-1. What can I say? They're basically they're the team to beat in the world right now until proven otherwise. And I'm happy to say that. I'm happy to see it. Peanut and Ruler were awesome here. Both of them are MVP candidates, and I hope that they can continue the success, like I said earlier this week. Moving on to Day 4 action here. We've got 2 days left of LCK, and we kicked off Day 4 here with a 3-game set that was kind of interesting between Hanwha Live Esports and Fredit BRION. BRION actually able to take the 2-1 series win. They prove they are not the worst in the Battle of the Least. That does squarely fall onto Hanwha Life, very deservedly, might I add. And Bro actually looks pretty decent in this series. Not only do they drop Game 1 in order to give fans maximum ticket value, which you gotta love that. But they pretty dominantly win both games 2 and 3. It was never really in doubt. Not only did they get Zeri in both games, which is something that this team has proven that they can use decently effectively, but man, like, jungle mid really stepped up. This has kind of been the up and down of Fredit BRION, right? Jungle mid was their strength in spring when this team surprised a lot of people and made playoffs, and then both and Lava took pretty big steps back here in summer. And unfortunately, just haven't been nearly as consistent. But when this team does win, it is quite frankly often those two players. And Lava, again, played really, really phenomenal in this one. He's going to get my player of the series here. When this Fredit BRION team wins, it is often Lava getting that player of the series because he really is kind of the conduit for a lot of their big plays. Not only was he that in spring, which he definitely was in spring, a very underrated player in spring, but he's definitely been that in summer as well, even though he is been much more of a problem in their losses than he was in spring, in my opinion. The 2 games of victory here in games 2 and 3 were really, really solid. Game 2, I think you could chalk a lot of it up to playing really well on the Poppy and basically just destroying Unfleek in the jungle, which happened. And then in game 3, I think you just got to the point where that Victor was doing so much damage in those team fights towards the back half that there was really no chance the Hanwha Life was actually going to be able to ever win a fight against them. So big shout out to Lava, he played well. And big shout out to who also played pretty well here. And definitely someone I want to give credit to. Henna and Delight actually had a relatively okay week here. They were pretty decent earlier in the week. Definitely not the problem in their loss earlier in the week. And then they actually played pretty decent here. Arguably the best, week that they had in summer here in week 8. Not the best saying of all time, but, definitely something, Morgan being good, shout out Morgan, King Morgan. Love him to death. Wasn't super important in this series, but him mentally being there is probably the reason that they won, just because Morgan has that effect on people. But yeah, Fredit BRION looking pretty good overall in this series. As for Hanwha Life, shout out to OnFleek. He breaks the record for most duds in a split earlier in the week, and then he compounds that later in the week here as he gets it again, the dud of the series here for OnFleek. Not an ideal here. They play OnFleek and Cheani, not a combo we've seen often, and it did not work out for them. Unfortunately, Cheani was not all that good for them in this series outside of that game 1 where they played the Kalista and Mumu, and things worked out just generally speaking off the back of Dudu just getting super duper fed on the gangplank and really just there not being any sort of counterplay to that. But outside of that, they just got outplayed. They weren't as good. There's really no other way to put it. OnFleek definitely got out jungled by so he's going to get my dud of the series. But I think you could realistically give this to Vista as well, who the Nami and the Nautilus games in games 2 and 3 were not good. I just thought Vista played, pretty decent in game 1 here on the Amumu, whereas I think OnFleek definitely, I don't want to say lucked his way into the win a little bit more, but the Trundle was kind of more of a secondary player than the Amumu was in that game 1. So OnFleek gets the dud and not Vista, even though Vista has quietly been, like, not good at all this year. So, yeah. Hanwha Life, outlook-wise, not looking good. They're not a good team. They're the worst team in the league. I don't think that they are really able to compete with pretty much anybody other than maybe Nongshim and obviously Bro to an extent. But Bro just proved they were better than them. So, Hanwha Life's not good. I expect this roster to blow up. OnFleek, I would expect to not see play a lot the rest of the year. At least I wouldn't be playing him. Fredit, BRION, you know, this is what you want to see, right? You want to see them be able to beat some of the worst teams in the league to at least give you some level of confidence that this team isn't a complete dumpster fire. They've gotten better week after week after week in summer after basically the most disastrous start you could possibly have. And they've gotten to the point where they're a pretty decent team. I'm not sure if they're actually better or worse than a team like KDF. To me, they feel worse, but obviously, you know, I'd have to see them beat them for me to really feel confidence about something like that. Overall, just not the most, like, dominant of wins here, but, you know, a win is a win over Hanwha, and especially when it comes from your main players, you're going to be happy about that. Moving on to our second series here of day 4, and we had a good one here. Two teams that I think are positioned relatively similarly in the standings right now. A pretty big matchup here between KT Rolster and Liiv SANDBOX. And LSB is able to take the 2-1 series win here. Going 2-0 this week is absolutely ginormous for the SANDBOX team as they continue to make their push towards being a top 3 team come playoff time. I think they would be very excited about getting that, and they're really, really trying to make that a reality. Game 1 was Liiv all the way, you know, just Krako taking over the map on the Skarner pick, which I think has been underrated overall as a pick, but maybe not, you know, we've seen it kind of struggle a little bit this week in the LCK. And then Prince being able to do 1 million damage on the Sivir with Kale having a phenomenal game on the Renata. Game 2 was very much up KT's alley. A great game from Vikla here on the Sylas. He gets that Sylas again, and he dominates. Vikla's actually been super duper good for this KT Rolster team over the past few weeks, and he continued that here in a game 2 where he played great. Cuz had a good game, Rascal had a good game, Aiming had a good game, Life had a good game. Pretty much everybody played well for KT in game 2. They just outplayed him pretty hard. Now, game 3 was KT's to win. They ended the game up like 5k gold, and they lost. And that is unfortunate for KT Rolster. They were the better team this series by a considerable margin, I will say. But shout out to Rascal, who instead of ending the game during the dragon fight, TP'd in, and they lost the fight and they lost the game. Not going to say that's, you know, the only thing that lost them the game, but that fight was disastrous, and that was a pretty bad call from Rascal to TP there. Whoever was either calling him in or if he was making that decision just was not a good one. You can't cancel TP anymore, so definitely not good. And then, you know, shout out to Aiming for trying his best to win that game, because really they should have won that game. Cuz was playing well, Vikla was playing well, Aiming was playing well, Life was playing well. KT was the better team by far in game 3 here, and they could not pull it out. But big shout out to Liiv SANDBOX because Prince did carry that late game team fight. You gave him the Zeri and you gave him the opportunity, and he capitalized on it. He played really, really well in that late game team fight. Not only was he really important in game 1 in their win, but he was basically the reason they won this series here in game 3. Without Prince, they do not win. So he's my player of the series here. He played really well. Nobody else in this team played well in game 3. Everybody else had their game 1. And then that was basically it. So I'm kind of pulling my double card here that is kind of rare, as you guys know on this channel, which is the dud of the series on the winning team, because I think they deserve it. And my dud of the series here is going to go to Dove in the top lane, who was a huge problem for Liiv SANDBOX, as he has been for a considerable amount of the year. Obviously, he offers them a different level of flexibility that they don't typically have here. They can flex picks like the Akali and the Sylas and Ryze top lane that they typically wouldn't be able to do with like a top laner who may not have the same kind of experience on those picks, and they've done that successfully a few times. But outside of that, when he's on actual top laners, when he's on Gnar, when he's on Gwen, he does not look good. He looks like arguably the worst top laner in the LCK, and that's been a problem for Liiv SANDBOX all year long. He continues to be an issue. Closer also continues to be a pretty big issue. His Talia game in game 2 was abysmally bad. Certainly something to keep in mind there. When Closer is not on the champions that we know he's good on, Akali, Sylas, Azir, those 3. When he's not on one of those 3 champions, he is miserably bad. And that's certainly something to keep in mind. But, you know, they'll always have Prince, they'll always have Kale. Even Krako, I think for the most part, played relatively well in the series. Just not a good game 3 from him as he got completely out-jungled by Cuz. Overall, Liiv is going to be very happy, I think, to pull out this win. KT, on the other hand, Not so much. KT's going to be so frustrated that they let that game 3 slip out of their hands. How can you lose a game up 5k gold? That is certainly not something that you want to do. But overall, I really feel like they were the better team in this series, even if they lost. If Rascal doesn't make that TP play, they probably win. And even when he does, if he's a little bit earlier on the TP, they probably win the fight. And then it doesn't matter. They just march down and end the game anyways. So there was such a slim margin for Liiv SANDBOX to actively win this game. And I think KT unfortunately found that margin and threw the game away. So definitely frustrating to watch if you're a KT fan, but you gotta love it if you're Liiv SANDBOX. Outlook-wise, I really don't know if this changes my opinion on these two teams too much, because again, Liiv, while they won this series, I don't really know if they played like they, deserved to win the series. So definitely something to keep in mind. KT, Liiv SANDBOX, Liiv's gonna be very happy to get that win in the win column, but it's not exactly the most resounding win that I think any team has had all year long. That's going to bring us to our 5th and final day here of Week 8 LCK action, and we kicked off Day 5 here with a fun matchup between NS RedForce and T1. A bottom team versus a top team. It's always interesting to see how these matchups go, and T1 always finds a way to make these interesting. And this one was definitely no exception, as T1 is able to pull out the win in the end, but it is certainly not clean. There are a lot of avenues here for NS to actively win the game, and if it weren't for some hard collapses by the end of Game 3, maybe we're looking at a different series. But Game 1 was definitely a T1 favored win. It was relatively clean off of the back of Faker's Azir being able to take over in those late game teamfights, Guma doing infinite damage on the Sivir, and then Keria playing phenomenally here on the Rakan. Game 2, though, was all NS. Like, this was as stompy as a stomp gets when it comes to a NS win. They decimated T1. BDD looked unstoppable on that Sylas. He was actually just unkillable. Dread was a huge problem on the Vi. Snowflower played probably his best game of the split here on the Renata. They just looked great. Faker looked bad. Zeus, especially on that Renekton, looked really bad. Shout out Renekton. He does that to good players. But yeah, T1 said, all right, I guess we're going to go full throttle here. And in Game 3, they picked the Zac. They picked the Draven. They go for this full fight comp. And it's really, really funny. Zeus ints a little bit early. We're going to let that slide. He ints a little bit late. We're going to let that slide. Faker plays out of his mind here at the end of Game 3. Owner has a really good one here on the Viego as well, and T1 is able to take it after BDD completely collapses on the Ahri in Game 3. A horrible performance from him. Overall, Faker's clearly, in my opinion, the player of the series here for T1. He was the impact player not only early in the series, but late in the series. Both Game 1 and Game 3 are probably not won without a top-tier mid laner here on the Azir, and Faker certainly delivered. I've definitely been a little bit lower on Faker's contributions to this team this year, as, in my opinion, he's been the least important player on T1 in 2022, but that's not to say he's still not a very good player. He's just not someone who I think has to carry a lot of the load for T1. He's been relatively consistent for most of the year, and when he's given the opportunity to carry, when he's put on an Azir and it's like, okay, you have to win this late game, he still shows that he definitely has the capabilities to do that. Big shout out to Owner for that really good Game 3, like I said, on the Vi, or on the Viego, I should say, in general. Just a really, really good game, and then, gotta love Zeus pulling out the Zac top in Game 3. As for NS, not a great series here, but honestly, not a bad series. Like, it's T1, and you played really well. Like, you dominated them in Game 2, I will say. But that's kind of par for the course for T1. They often just kind of throw one of the first 2 games against bad teams, because that's what they do. They play Renekton, Lee Sin in the top lane, and it's like, oh, you have 2 champions who, if we get to 20 minutes, are just completely useless. And they couldn't win. At that point, it was just like, GG's. So, BDD looks phenomenal in that Game 2 on the Sylas. He looks equally as garbage in Game 3 on the Ahri. Definitely a back-and-forth series from him. He was very close to getting my dud of the series because he was, like, the direct reason they lost Game 3. But at the end of the day, he was also probably the biggest reason they were in that series to begin with. So, something to keep in mind there. It is going to go to Kana in the top lane, who I just felt never really made an impact. I thought Dread, BDD, Ghost, and Snowflower all played relatively well, especially in Game 2, but even in Game 3, Kana was really the only one who I felt had very little impact on the game and on the series as a whole. Yes, he was on tank duty on Ornn in both Games 2 and 3, but you can have a pretty big impact on Ornn if you play your cards right, and I just don't think Kana did that, so unfortunately, he's going to get my dud of the series. But honestly, overall, like, relatively good series here from NS. Definitely not the worst they've ever had. Taking a game off of T1, a lot of teams have done that. Hanwha Life even did that. but to be able to kind of actively destroy them in Game 2, and then to play relatively tough, and if BDD doesn't completely run it in Game 3, you probably win Game 3 here, or at least you give yourself a relatively decent chance to be in the lead come endgame for Game 3. Like, that's a decent series here for Nongshim, and they've definitely looked a lot better as of late, but this is probably the best series they played all split long, so shout out to that. I don't expect it to continue. T1 does this, but, you know, shout out to Nongshim for at least showing up here today. As for T1, like I always say, they do this. At least they won in the end. That's something you're going to be happy about, but they play to their competition's level. When they're playing a bad team, they play bad, and that's exactly what happened in this series. I don't think this is indicative of their skill level, as we not only we saw earlier in the week, but obviously we've seen it all year long. This is one of the best teams in the world, and I expect them to be one of the best teams in the world, you know, around playoff time, just, you know, when they're not playing teams like Nongshim. So shout out to Faker, one of his better series of the year, but overall, T1's going to feel pretty good to get out of this with a win, even if they played kind of like shit. All right, that's going to bring us to our final series of the week here in our second series of Day 5. And it was a decently fun one here between the Kwangdong Freecs and DRX. And DRX is able to pick up the 2-0 series win here, continuing the trend of them flipping back and forth from going 2-0, 0-2, to back to 2-0, week after week after week. 2-0 week, they're going to be happy about it. Not exactly the cleanest 2-0, you know, but, you know, it happened. So shout out to Kingen. I want to give a big shout out to Kingen, because I really think Kingen's gotten a lot of flack, and I've really been the one to give him all that flack over the course of his time in the LCK, and not just that, but his time in the LPL as well. I think Kingen has kind of proven that he's just not that guy, but he's having the best split of his career, and I don't think a lot of people are noticing because DRX has been kind of a dumpster fire, but when this team wins, he plays really well, and he played really well in this series. I want to give big props to him. He's going to get my player of the series here against KDF. Kingen was great. 1-1-21. That Gragas game in Game 2, disgusting to watch. Even in Game 1, like those body slams, him being able to peel for pretty much everybody on the team, the engages, the casks, they really set up DRX to be in a phenomenal spot all game long. And I'm really happy to say that because, you know, Kingen is someone who I really was hoping would find his form coming over to the LCK. We've seen players do that before. Zika is actually a great example of that, although I thought Zika was very underrated in the LPL. He comes over here to the LCK, and I think he really finds his form on this team. Him and Kingen and Zika were definitely the two carries in this series, but Kingen's going to get the player of the series. Shout out to Zika, though. 2 really good games of Ahri here. He was really able to dominate in that Game 1 with those charms, and then Game 2, he was the main damage dealer for this team outside of Deft, who just continues to be ridiculously consistent. You give him 2 games of Kalista, or not Kalista, of Sivir, and he's going to be able to absolutely obliterate you, and he did. In the series, he was doing a lot of damage, even if he was sometimes just a little bit mispositioned. So, shout out to Deft. It is still Pioshik and Beryl, who I think are a little bit up in the air, but they had relatively good series here. Obviously, I'm not a huge fan of the Xin Zhao pick, but he was able to make it work, and then you bring in the Lulu in both games here for Beryl. It was able to work against worse competition. I'm still definitely a little weary about them going up against some of the better teams in playoffs, but they certainly made it do here. So, overall, DRX, pretty good series. They looked pretty solid here. They moved to 9-7. They're in a decent spot to kind of control their own destiny in terms of playoff seeding. As for KDF, this team's not very good, and there are good players on it. I really do like Teddy. I think Teddy is ridiculously underrated because KDF has just continuously not been good all year long, but I think Teddy has secretly tried his best to absolutely carry this team in a very similar way, and I think I made this comparison a couple weeks back, to what Light is doing on LNG over in the LPL. I think sometimes your AD carry can really only do so much when it really feels like the rest of the team is just collapsing around them, and that very much feels like what's happening to Teddy. I think Fate has his moments where he can make an impact. He also has his moments where he has zero impact on the game at all. As a supportive player, sometimes when you're losing, you just don't have that killer instinct to be able to take over and win games. So, yes, I think Fate could be a decent piece for a decent team, but this isn't a decent team, and so sometimes Fate just looks irrelevant. And then I think Keenelm and Moham or Hoyt or whoever's playing in the support position have all been relatively not good over the course of the last few weeks. Keen has definitely taken a pretty huge step back over the past few weeks after a pretty good start to the year. And then Elm and the support position have been a problem for KDF all year long. So definitely not something that they're going to be super excited about. Elm's going to get my dud of the series here. The macro on this team continues to just be awful. The team fighting on this team continues to just be awful. There's no peel. There's no decision making. It's all just, it feels very solo QE, and it's just not good. And I think Elm is a big part of that. He was not good in the series. He's really not been good this year at all. One of the worst players in the LCK, in my opinion. But overall, outlook-wise for these two teams, KDF is bad. Like, you know, I think they are potentially closer to the bottom 4 than they are, you know, to, we'll say, like, the top 6. They're not a team that I think is going to even remotely sniff, like, playoff contention. Now, I think that, I don't know if they're officially eliminated. I think they might officially be eliminated. I think top 6 might officially be locked, because I know DRX locked their playoff spot with this win, but KDF just isn't a good team, and they never really performed like it. They're not a team, they're a bunch of individual players, and it really shows every single week. And then for DRX, congratulations on locking playoffs. That means they've officially locked Regional Gauntlet at the very worst, and this is a team that I think very much can get hot and basically just win out. We've seen them sweep DAMWON in the regular season. We've seen them contest both T1 and Gen.G in terms of series. Like, this is a team that I think can beat anybody on any given day. It's just the consistency out of Pio, and Barrel that I think have definitely not been there. But Kingin is starting to play some of the best League of his career. Zika is arguably playing the best League of his career. Deft has been incredibly consistent, and we know he will perform in the clutch. So I do have faith that this DRX team will be able to turn it around, and this win just helps solidify that a little bit more in my head. All right, that is going to do it for my Week 8 LCK overview and analysis of all 5 days. Up on the screen right now, you're going to see the updated LCK standings. And in fact, there's a lot to look at, because not only have the top 2 seeds been locked in terms of who gets a bye in round 1, round 2 in Gen.G and T1, but the playoffs themselves are completely locked. The top 6 teams have all locked playoffs, and the bottom 4 teams have all been locked out of playoffs. So we know who is making playoffs, although there is a lot of positioning still left to do. In the first column, you're going to see my power rankings. In the second column, you're going to see how those have changed from last week to this week. We can go over the biggest risers, the biggest fallers. In fact, there's only one change this week, and it's the fact that Liiv, SANDBOX, and KT Rolster are swapping places. Last week, I felt a lot of confidence around KT Rolster. They had a really, really good momentum bit going, and I really felt some good confidence around that team. They did not reward me this week. I started to get excited about KT, and unfortunately, that was too much, and they're going to go back down to number 6 here. Liiv, SANDBOX, though, a really good week, beating up on DAMWON. It was a huge win for them, and even though they played KT, and KT was probably the better team, Liiv was able to pull out the win, and so they're going to jump up to number 4. I'm still not completely sold that they're going to be better than DAMWON come playoff time, just because I think there is a talent difference in terms of those teams, but it really is like a top-heavy team versus a top-heavy team, right? It's Prince and Kale versus, you know, Canyon and Showmaker, and it's just who can win that series. So it'll definitely be interesting to see that, but for now, I'm just going to leave it the way it is. Really, the difference between 3 and 6, as it has been for most of the year, is super minuscule. KT was the better team against Liiv, SANDBOX this week. They just couldn't pull out the win. DRX, I really think, can beat anybody on any day. Same with DAMWON, and then Liiv, SANDBOX has a strategy that, if not stopped, is probably going to win them games. So just, you know, 3 through 6, whatever. It's going to be a really fun first round of the playoffs, no matter how seeding ends up working out. And then no changes to the bottom 4. They all stay pretty much exactly where they were, so not a lot to talk about in that respect. Moving on to my player of the week and my dud of the week here for week 8. My player of the week for week 8 is going to go to Zika on DRX. He's been ridiculously underrated all year long, and he had a very good week here for DRX. Not only was he able to show up and kind of dominate in their earlier series this week, but in their later series this week, he was also able to have a huge impact, really be the main damage threat for DRX, especially in that game 1 there. Really, he's just playing very, very phenomenally overall. And I think he's just not getting the recognition he deserves. So for me, he's going to get my player of the week here in week 8. My dud of the week, no surprise, I think, to anybody, is going to go to On Fleek on Hanwha Life, who just continues to be the worst player in esports right now, at least in LoL esports in the major regions. He just is outclassed by pretty much everybody he's played against, and I really don't see the benefit to playing him anymore. I don't really want... I hate calling for people to be replaced, but On Fleek has just shown that he's not LCK quality, and he's really, really dragging Hanwha Life down to that number 10 spot. So my dud of the week here is going to be On Fleek on Hanwha Life, and my player of the week is going to go to Zika on DRX. But that is going to do it. If you guys enjoyed, please go ahead and leave a like. It really does mean a lot for the channel. Let me know down in the comment section below your player of the week, your dud of the week, your game of the week, all that fun stuff. You know I love chatting it up with you guys. Obviously, you guys are going to think that some teams are too high. You guys are going to think that some teams are too low. Let me know your opinions down there. I love having these kinds of conversations with everybody. But with that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.